Hello, Tom Holroyd, and welcome to Scribecraft. It's lovely to have you here.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
Before we get into exploring the range of works that you've published so far, could you tell me and the audience a bit more about yourself and how you came to start your writing journey? I believe it's something that's been with you since childhood. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I've been writing since I was a kid, and it's always been one of those things where I've enjoyed reading since I was young, and then I would sort of make up stories in my head, and then occasionally write one or two of them down. And it was only when I kind of got to senior school that it was then a case of actually discovering that creative writing was a thing you could do, and spent quite a lot of time doing that in schools and then in my spare time, sort of world building and writing short stories. And then really it was around about 2007, 2008 when I sort of started writing as if I was actually going to write a book. And it was off the back of a tour of Iraq in 2007. And I was serving with an American soldier, and he handed me Max Brooks's World War Z, which I read, I think, in about a day and a half, and then thought, oh, this is a fun idea, and it kind of gestated in my brain, and then eventually turned into my own version of which is the zombie war Battle for Britain, and taking a sort of UK slant on that similar story. That was my first sort of proper attempt at writing.
Okay, looking back to your younger efforts, is there anything that still stands out to you as a favorite short story or piece of world building, from your youth?
Uh, Not really. I've taken some of the ideas forward, but I think as with most things when you're quite young, is you're blatantly plagiarizing from everything you're exposed to. So I was blatantly plagiarizing from the Forgotten Realms D&D stories, the world building there, from Star Wars, from Warhammer 40,000, from pretty much everything I was exposed to, and sort of just building almost fan fiction, but worlds that were or works that were adjacent to those worlds rather than set in them. But yeah, a lot of my early stuff very much based on what I was reading when I was a kid.
So we'll discuss your zombie book in more detail shortly, but just to rewind slightly. So you spoke of a tour in the Middle East. You've served in the British Army, and so I'd like you to just talk maybe a little bit about how your service, your experience, all the skills it brought, helped you in terms of your writing, and indeed what your writing helped you as well in doing in terms of maybe just having a bit of a pressure release valve, a bit of escapism. But also even prior to the army, you studied archaeology at university as well as other various historical periods and other subjects like that. To what extent has that academic background also helped inform some of your works as well?
I think so. Start with the earliest bit first, and I think academically, I've always liked history. I've always liked medieval history, and archaeology. Archaeology was one of those ones that it was a good course to do because it was history, but without too much time in the library and a little bit of more time outside. Doesn't really help your writing because you're sort of getting used to digging holes, and it did sort of help my career in the army afterwards. But certainly the passion for sort of history, for the medieval period, for the Roman period, was all of that was certainly helped by my degree. Service in the army, again, the army is not a brilliant place for creative writing. It's a very sort of structured writing style in the way that we do things. So I think creative writing for me was a way of breaking out of that slightly structured way of constructing narratives into something a bit more flowing and natural and storytelling. But certainly, military career, gave me some amazing experiences. I saw some really interesting parts of the world. Served with some really amazing people from both the UK, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Africa. So it gives you a sort of a breadth of experience. And I guess that with some of the writing, it gives you an insight into the military world and the military mindset that you can then bring across into your stories. And I think for me, the act of writing was certainly really, really good for my mental health and as a cathartic activity. Because certainly after the back of a tour in Iraq and a tour in Afghanistan, I wasn't in a terrible place, but I wasn't in a great place. And actually, writing helped to get a lot of that feeling and a lot of that frustration out. And as a much older man now, looking back and reading my first book, I can definitely see the slightly angry, mildly traumatized 20-something-year-old who wrote that book. I can see lots of the frustrations that manifested themselves in that.
So, focusing on the zombie war, Battle for Britain, you said it was basically your first proper attempt at a full-length novel. Um, how did you approach? Was that a conscious choice, or did it just grow into that? And how did you approach it? Was it just an evolution of your writing from your school days, or did you actually, yes, build on those, but approach the book in a very um, different way, methodologically, so to speak?
So it was definitely an organic thing. So it just kind of I think it just came out of musings of I loved Max Brooks's World War Z. Thought it was a great book, and it was a really interesting way of structuring a novel and a story around sort of survivors' interviews, and almost treating it like a news piece and a think piece. And I kind of just got thinking, I love this story. What would it be like if this thing happened in Britain, or I wonder what happened while in the World War Z world, while in Britain, while the author was focused on elsewhere, predominantly America. And it kind of evolved as a series of sort of short stories based on places I'd been, places I'd visited, things I'd thought about. And then I kind of put it all together and stitched it together into a bit of a narrative a lot later on. And it kind of sat languishing on a shelf. I think I started writing it in about 2008, 2009, and then it sort of languished until about 2014, 15 time when I came back to it again, actually finished it off because I think I really struggled with an ending um, for a good couple of years, and then I was thought just sort of I'm gonna finish this thing, and it's just one of those things that niggles at the back of your brain for a really long time, and just like right, I'm gonna get on and do this. Finished it, edited it, sat on it again for a while, went back, reread it, edited it again, and then eventually sort of self published it.
So, are there like main characters in it, or is it very much an ensemble piece, bird's eye view of the zombie apocalypse?
So what I did was I took each chapter is so the book is structured as Tom Holroyd as an author, as an investigative journalist who has lived through the zombie war in Britain and is looking back 10 years on after the war in order to collate a series of interviews that he had either during the war or after the war. And so the consistent character throughout I guess, is the narrator. Um, but then you see lots of different characters and throughout the interviews that take place. Some of them reoccur. There's a Scottish soldier who I think I imaginatively called Jock McTavish, so it's a really terrible name. But it's just I stuck with it, and it was one of those sort of joke ones that I kind of kept in. Um, and then I used friends names, and with their permission, friends names and people that I knew, to sort of generate various characters throughout. And it just all came together a bit organically. But there's no one character throughout. There's a couple that it follows. But I wanted to get quite as broad a spread of people as possible.
And you say you went on to self-publish it. Did you ever initially consider approaching like agents or going down attempting to go down the more conventional publishing route, or did you always feel, no, this is my own little project, and I'm happy to kind of self-release it and see where it goes?
I did try and approach some agents. I did try and approach some publishing houses, but I think as any aspiring author will know, or will probably relate to, is that you get knocked back a lot. So it was a lot of letters written and a lot of well, very few rejections received, and just quite a lot of silence. And I think that's always the slightly disheartening bit, is that you send out a lot of correspondence and get absolute deafening silence back. So I think after a series of a period of just sort of not getting any bites, not getting any interest. I sort of stumbled across self-publishing because I think it was sort of only really just starting to become a thing. Read up on it, decided to do it through Amazon, given how huge Amazon is. And yeah, I thought actually the process surprisingly easy to do it through Amazon, and then threw it out there and saw how it landed.
And what's been the feedback to it in general?
Uh, I think, as with anything, it's always a mixed bag. I think the great thing about putting yourself out there is it's always a terrifying experience, because you are putting something that you've poured quite a lot of energy and effort and heart and soul into, and you really hope you're going to get some positive reactions. I got predominantly positive reactions. There's some nice reviews on Amazon on the webpage. As with anything that is related to anything military, you get lots of the sort of the militaria nerds jumping out the woodwork going, "Oh, that's not quite right," or "Oh, he got this wrong." And it's like, come on, there are zombies in it. Let's not focus on the fact that an airbase might have been closed down 10 years previously. Um, it was one of those things where you take a little bit of artistic license as a writer, and then some people take it far too seriously. Um, I think interestingly, I think I was unfortunate in that I did publish just as Brexit was coming to a head. And then that lent a slightly different tone to the novel, which I hadn't anticipated. So a number of people came out the woodwork and were saying, "Oh, this is blatantly sort of a pro-Brexit piece of work and anti-Europe," and it was like, and actually not my intention in the slightest with the book, considering I wrote it in 2000, or started writing it in 2007. But it was always interesting, the different feedback and different ratings you get from people.
Am I correct in thinking there's an audio version?
There is, yeah, there is. So which that was not anything that I anticipated. So I got an email from a voice actor who contacted me completely out of the blue, and said, "Love your book, really enjoyed it. Have you thought about doing an audio book?" And I said, honestly, no, I have no idea what I would do. How, what what's the process? He walked me through the process. He did a couple of samples. Loved his voice. I thought he did the characters really, really well. And actually, yeah, really impressed with the final product. So and I think the audio book actually does better than the book, which I think is indicative nowadays that lots of people like to listen to books on the go. I mean, I'm certainly one of those myself.
Okay, and so what was next for you after Zombie War Battle for Britain came out?
So I had an idea in the back of my mind to do a sort of a fantasy novel that was sort of set in its own world, swords and sandals, but not sorcery. So it wasn't going to be, high fantasy, Tolkien-esque, or Dungeons and Dragons with mythical creatures, magic, wizards, elves, dwarfs, etc., etc. It was more going to be um, historical fiction, historical fantasy, but in a sort of world that is very similar to ours but different. And so that had been sort of percolating in my brain, and I'd been world building a bit in the background and coming up with some ideas and starting to write those down into a story. Um, and I think by the time that I published Battle for Britain, I kind of had a very, very bare bones story, um, in sort of almost bullet point form. And I started writing. I think I started writing it during the Olympics in 2012, because we were all sort of glued to the tellies, had time on our hands. It was a lovely, glorious summer, and I just sort of sat down watching sports and typing at the same time. Um, and yeah, the story that sort of story then evolved into the Fenris Saga, which is um, at the moment is a three parts, three books series, possibly more. I've got book one written and published. Book two I've written and is in review, looking to get published. Probably not this year, but hopefully early part of next year. And I've got book three in outline, and certainly in my head. But yeah, it's a sort of fantasy story set in a similar world to Western Europe, early Middle Ages, which is harkening back to my sort of passions at school and university. And so yeah, so a really interesting story, and follows around a sort of young warrior, young northern warrior who's from a people called the Norsery, very similar to Vikings, with a bit of Polynesian thrown in there as well. And it's about his sort of slightly cliche story of, village gets raided and starts off on a revenge story, but which very rapidly grows into a much bigger conspiracy, and a journey towards more sort of interest, strength, power, and greatness and heroics. So yeah, and a fun, exciting thing to write.
So for Zombie War, you're able to obviously draw an inspiration from the Max Brooks novels you said, your military experience, bit of real world thinking as well. But obviously for the Fenris Saga, it takes place in a completely original world that has sprung from your imagination. It's no small thing to basically create. We talk about world building, but in your case, you literally built an entire fantasy world, in which Fenris, explores and goes on his adventures. How did you approach such, frankly, an epic task?
Slowly, a little bit by bit. So I think I think I, like a lot of people, always love Vikings. Vikings are cool. They're everyone loves the idea of sort of lone bands of raiders doing some cool adventurous stuff. And I had a huge amount of inspiration from Bernard Cornwell and his Last Kingdom series, which I loved the books and I loved the character of Uhtred. And so there was inspiration from that series. Um, Reading books like authors like David Gemmell, and the world building that he seemed to just do so naturally, and sort of create these incredible worlds. So it was sort of pulling from all those little different sources, and then merging that into actually what is kind of still an organically growing place. So I think I started very small initially with just the local area. Um, and one of the things I loved was I discovered Incarnate, which is a sort of mapping, open, free, on the internet mapping tool for fantasy worlds. And so I just started essentially mapping out the world physically of what it might look like. And then the story sort of, and the characters and the culture just started to grow organically from there. And then I started to write that down, and it was one of those things where I've I had about 90% of the world built in my head, and then started to put it on paper before I then actually started to write the book, because there are some bits where I've had to go back and re-edit it slightly, and as the stories evolved, and kind of make the world match the novel, or make the novel match the world. Um, but I got pretty much most of the way there in the first instances before I started writing. But it was a great fun process, and there's still a big world out there that I can still build on.
You kind of answered one of the questions I had for you, which was, do you have it start off with a world Bible, so to speak, or grow organically, or a combination of both? And you've answered that in terms of constructing that world. But with regard, same question applies though to the narrative arc of the trilogy. Do you have in your head the ABC of Fenris's saga, or are the very least just the broad brushstrokes, and you're going to fill in some of the finer details as you're writing? I mean, how in detail have you plotted out his future?
So I started with a very broad brush, A, B, C, D. These are the big milestones that happen to get him from us introducing the character through to where I want to sort of finish book three. Then what I do is I sort of take book one, and I write the sketch of that in almost bullet point format. So I write, chapter one, Fenris did this. This happens now. Bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and I'll write the whole story in bullet point form. And then once I've done that, and that takes a while because new ideas pop in, and you want to then come up with some different concepts, different areas of study, different stories, and you'll read something else and then go, oh, that sounds cool. Let's sort of incorporate that. Um, and then once I have that sort of essay guide almost, I will then take that and I'll start writing, and I write in small chunks, mainly because it's very difficult to sit down and write in one continuous burst. I'd love to be able to do the professional author thing, which is sit down at a sit down at your computer first thing in the morning with a cup of coffee and just bang out several thousand words. What I've found is that I have to do it in bursts, normally around holiday times where I've actually got sort of concentrated periods. Um, and then because of that slightly disjointed writing approach, I then have to spend a lot of time going back through and editing it, because the point where I've started the book is often about several years from the time I finished the first draft. So writing styles changed sometimes. I've forgotten characters that I put in at the beginning and then don't have an end. So I then have to start almost the whole way over, and write it, and basically read it from the beginning, make notes, go, oh, you forgot to question mark, did you remember to close off this character later on, and then read through, finish those things. So it's quite a lengthy process, just simply because life, job, family, all of that gets in the way. For those of us that aren't professional writers and don't, have an agent giving us an advance in order to do this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a very bitty process, but I sort of do it almost in modules and stages, which is quite fun.
Yeah, I can appreciate the difficulty of something that takes a multi-year process, isn't it? And
Yes.
the if we accept that, um, but whether it was something that's done in stages of years, as you're talking about, or something that you could absolutely smash out in the course of a few months, did you still, taking those into consideration, do you still feel what kind of cognitive leap or personal development in your writing do you feel you had to do to jump from a single one-off zombie war book to a planned epic trilogy?
Well, I think you've got to be much more disciplined with your story and your characters. So I've got a series of spreadsheets. I've been um, quite rigorous about the process. So I've obviously got the world building Bible, as you refer to it, of this is what this city looks like. This is the map. This is the culture. This is the history of this area. This is the military, etc., etc. So I've got that written. I've got a massive spreadsheet which has got pretty much every character that we encounter, with a physical description, where we first meet them, what their motivations are, their allegiances, their culture, and then if they've died, because I had it very early on where I sort of started referencing a character and I was like, oh no, I killed him quite early on, and had to go back and rewrite all that. So learning that as I write and spontaneously just create a character from somewhere, I then have to sort of make sure that I log that character, because I then don't know how long it's going to be that I'll be able to then pick up the pen again, so to speak, and sort of revisit that. So being able to sort of take copious amounts of notes and have a really structured approach to the characters and the story and the arcs and the motivations, I find really helps, because otherwise, if I'm spreading it out over 3 or 4 years, there's no way that I'll be able to remember that.
Which fancy authors of epic sagas would you say have been most influential to you as you've been on this journey with the Fenris Saga? But to the extent that you can be inspired by them, but still retain your unique voice as Tom Holroyd.
So I veer and haul. So I read a lot of books, but it's a sort of veering and hauling between um, Raymond E. Feist and the Rift War sagas and all of the books that fell out of that. Um, and the Daughter of the Empire series with Janny Wurst. Those have been a huge influence on me. Just the fact that they created these incredible worlds together. So reading those, taking inspiration from those, the fact that Raymond E. Feist, he started in quite a, I mean, Magician was a great book and had two worlds which he introduced us to, but actually those worlds were the bits of those worlds that he mentions in the book are actually quite narrow, and then throughout various series the worlds get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's the kind of inspiration I took of start small and then slowly start to introduce people to different parts of the world, different elements of the world, and then that allows me as a writer to kind of explore.
Are you going to basically finish off the Fenris Saga with book
Uh,
three before you move on to your next one? Or are you going to take a break before you conclude the trilogy?
I don't know is the answer. I want to finish book three first. Absolutely want to finish book three first, and then I will see where that goes. I've got some ideas of where I want to go with the story, and it's then sort of whether or not it almost takes on a uh, almost a David, not David Gemmell, almost like a Bernard Cornwell-esque thing, where sort of you just start adding stories and start exploring the world. So I'm quite keen to explore that, and then we'll see where it goes. I'd quite like to do a bit more science fiction. So I enjoy science fiction writing and military fiction writing. So I've done some short stories on that. So yeah, we will see. We'll see how things go.
Well, I wanted to ask you about your military sci-fi actually, because that's one of one of the third pillars, as it were, of your portfolio.
Mm.
Um, could you tell us a bit more about your military sci-fi series?
Yeah, so those were something that I quite just enjoyed writing, and it was a case of they're very much a case of they're a series of short stories, and they are absolutely not connect. Well, I wouldn't say they're not connected. They started off as just a bunch of random ideas of, oh, wouldn't it be fun if this happened, and oh, wouldn't it be fun if this happened. And I just started writing a random short story, and then I kind of put them all together into a I sort of had to then sort of take them and rewrite them so they almost worked chronologically, and so it then became almost a series of short stories that told a sort of a snapshot story of certain events that happened along a fictitious timeline. Um, so I started off, I think, by writing as when I was lucky enough to visit the Falklands while I was serving, and so I was always intrigued by the Falklands War. So I did a sort of a short military short story of a fictitious near future invasion of the Falkland Islands and what that might look like. And I was using as a almost a think piece for what future military tech might do. And certainly, I was inspired by things like Ghost Fleet, which was, great military fiction book. Tom Clancy's the sort of the godfather of this genre. So there's almost like the techno thriller and bringing that into the stories. And then I just started writing random stories, but they've had a mildly prophetic element in that I wrote one about a global pandemic right before there was a global pandemic. I wrote one about a US invasion of Venezuela, and I really hope that one doesn't come true. So, yeah, and actually, one of them was set right before a Russian invasion of Eastern Europe, and you know, a Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, I'm probably going to stop writing those for a while, just in case I sort of accidentally ruin the space time continuum and get too prophetic.
Modern day Nostradamus. Never mind making money from writing. You could probably make a killing future for the stock market or something like that. Um,
Yeah, I need to write one about me winning the lottery.
so, what draws you to jump across these different genres from zombie horror to fantasy epic saga to military sci-fi?
I just like telling stories. I like reading different things. I think I grew up. The first book I can remember really, really loving was the Dragonlance Chronicles by Tracy Hickman and, oh my God, I've forgotten her name, which is terrible. but Dragon's Vortum, and that trilogy. And I was given that by a family friend, and I devoured the trilogy over a summer. And that really got me into reading. And then I discovered the Star Wars expanded universe with that Timothy Zahn started, um, and that got me into sci-fi. And then I just pretty much consumed anything that was science fiction, fantasy, military sci-fi related, and those kind of became my genres. So it's based on the books that I enjoy, and I guess I write what I enjoy reading, and so the ability to sort of flick between the three different genres is just, I guess, just part of having a broad reading base.
And we all know that the Star Wars expanded universe is the proper canonical sequence of events afterwards, and that the sequel trilogy was just expensive fan fiction. So, um,
Absolutely.
um, how do you
Although Disney's going to come for you for that statement.
allegedly canonical? There we go. But
Allegedly,
allegedly, it's okay.
Legends,
Um,
the Legends
the
universe.
Legend series, yes. Choose your poison on that one. So these are all quite tonally different, though. These
Mm.
genres. So how do you, when you're approaching each, how do you cognitively change your mindset in terms of how you approach your writing style, the characters, the general premises and stuff like that? Do you tend to find that you write pretty similarly, regardless of genre, or that there are subtle tweaks and differences in how you think and how you write, depending on that genre?
Uh, yeah, I think there's so first thing is I don't write different genres simultaneously. So it'll be I will write a sort of zombie book and then stop, and then write a sci-fi novel and then or sci-fi stories and then stop. So I absolutely can't write different cultures and different tones at the same time. I have to almost make that cognitive right break here and start again with something else. Um, so I find that it is an interesting process. I think my writing style probably stays the same. Just how I think it's just a case of giving a lot of thought to what the character is going to sound like, and making sure that the world building around that character is authentic and genuine. And again, copious amounts of notes to make sure that you don't cross contaminate or get things slightly wrong. But what I do tend to find is I have lots of notes on my phone. So my phone's notes is absolutely full of idea for story, idea for story, idea for story. So I have loads of ideas for stories. Um, Most of them I probably won't ever really develop, given the time I have. But it's fun just to sort of sit and throw out some ideas and throw out some thoughts, and then maybe develop one or two of those. But when in order to keep that single clarity of character and tone and genre, I have to write that character and tone and genre as one. I can't veer and haul between the two or three.
Are there any particular moral or philosophical questions or themes that you find yourself maybe returning to, either subtly or deliberately, across the various books within a series or across the series?
So probably not deliberately, but I think as with everything, when you're writing, a bit of you is always in there consciously or subconsciously. I think with the zombie war novel, there was definitely an angry 20-year-old who'd been on tour, who sort of felt somewhat betrayed by the government and the way the government treated people. And that absolutely came through in the book, and you can sort of feel the frustration at times with government structures and the way things are. And I think I was very very young and naive and idealistic in some of the ways that I wrote. Certainly the way that the military coming in to save the day. I think I was then older when I started to write the military sci-fi stories, so it was more a sort of slightly more mature worldview. Wasn't really trying to get any moralistics in there. There's probably little bits of politics that sneak in terms of um, you know global cooperation. Um, Definitely something about some overpopulation, environmentalism views have crept in there. But I think the nice thing about fantasy, and certainly the fantasy genre, is that you don't have to do any of that. You don't really have to try and be moralistic. You can tell a story, but I think with certainly with Fenris, he's not a hero in the sense that he's not a a knight in shining armor and white cloak waving his sword and saving damsels. He's probably quite a damaged individual who just basically wants to kill people who've wronged him, but at the same time is a loyal friend and a good leader and a good fighter, and a good problem solver, which is someone I guess we can all sort of, well, I certainly can aspire to.
I'd like to just talk a bit more about your process, your process,
Mm,
in terms of the nitty-gritties of it. So now you're talking, you're having to kind of write in bite-sized chunks, especially around holiday, because day job, family commitments, and so forth. But when you do have
yeah.
that time, do you have a writing area, a little kind of writer's sanctuary, or is it a case of wherever you can put your laptop on your lap? Do you have to have a certain period of time, or is it a case of, right, I've got a half-hour coffee break, I've got a 40-minute commute on the train, I'll type some words out. I mean, or do you need that nice, quiet, I need a few hours undisturbed, and I need that time. How do you work?
So a bit of all of those is the honest answer. So um, sometimes it's a case of I will snatch half an hour, 40 minutes when there's an opportunity and when the muse takes me and there's a moment to, bang out a few words and I've had a thought about something. I'm like, right, I need to get this down, otherwise it's gonna go out through the brain. The vast majority over the last 3 years has been done as I mentioned earlier on holiday. So lucky enough to go away on holiday, for 2 weeks in the summer, and I tend to just go right. I'm going to go and sit somewhere else, somewhere quiet in the shade, normally with a glass of wine and a laptop, and just write for a couple of hours. And my wife's really, really supportive, and the kids are now slightly older, so they're not pestering me constantly. Um, but it's just a case of right, just give me a couple of hours a day just to write, and then the rest of my time is yours. And I found that over the last 3 summers, that's when I've managed to break the back of most of book two. But it has taken me 3 summers to get there because life gets in the way. And it is a case of sadly I don't. Every time I sort of start to set up a space, kids colonize it because they always want to be where you are. So I don't really have anywhere in the house that's sort of a writer's den. I'd love one, but sadly, not enough space. Sometimes it's laptop on the lap in the corner, or laptop on a desk, or on an ironing board, or something like that. So it's a mixed bag.
And once your manuscript is quote unquote finished, how do you approach the editing process? Do you edit as you go, or almost finish a chapter, go back, review it, finish a large portion of chapters, go back, review it, or do you just smash your way through the book and then go back after you've had a bit of breathing space away from it?
So I will do the latter. So I will write the whole thing, smash my way to the point where I'm happy that the story has ended in one way or another. I will leave it for a couple of months normally, because what I find is if I go back to it too quickly, you don't see the errors because your brain is almost programmed to go, oh, no, no, this is what you meant in this bit, even if you didn't write it that way, because your story. So I'll leave it for a couple of months, try and sort of disassociate from it. Then I'll print the whole thing off in sort of space between each line, and I'll just go through it with a pencil, read it, often read it out loud, just to make sure it makes sense, and the language flows. Make a whole load of notes, then go back from the top and make those changes, and then I'll sit on it again for a bit, and then I will print out a couple of rough copies for close friends who enjoy the fantasy genre, and just go, "Would you mind reading this for me?" And then I usually get some really, really good feedback, and It's normally the comments on the bits that I've missed, as in, oh, you didn't explore that, or did you mean that this person was going to do this? And they've always sort of pulled out some really, really good stuff that I've just sort of skipped over. And it's normally about, yeah, three or four drafts. Five, I think the first book was about 7 drafts by the time I was actually finally happy with it. And then it's a case of, putting it all together, making it look right for an ebook format, and making it look right for a paperback format. And then it's the uploading and then sort of the marketing bit, which is something I'm terrible at.
Are you tempted to use AI a bit more in the process, whether it be editing, image generation for either conceptual art or covers, editing, creative feedback even?
So I've had Grammarly for a long time, which is glorified spell check with a little bit of ML and AI thrown in. So I've always found that's really, really helpful for sort of helping with sentence structure and making sure that it's like, did you mean it to mean this or this? And also, my spelling is awful, so frankly, having a spell check is an absolute lifesaver. And I would have struggled had I ever had to have written on typewriter, because I would have gone through so much ribbon and so much paper, it would have been ridiculous. Um, but AI for creative writing, I don't use. Um, Not a fan of, because I think the way that AI scalps pretty much everyone's work is immoral and frankly irritating as an author, because all you're doing is you're essentially plagiarizing millions of books rather than just plagiarizing one or two. Um, Image generation I found really, really useful. So actually being able to go, found has been quite useful is when I've been trying to describe something, um, and it's really difficult when you've got that image in your head of what you want something to look like. And I'll write something and I'll take the text and stick it into an AI and go, visualize this for me. And if it throws out something that is completely different, I then have to rewrite the text. If it's at least 2/3 of the way there, I'll then tweak it, just so I'm trying to get that image in my mind. So describing a castle, for example, I'll sort of describe the turrets and the minarets and the wall and the colors and all that sort of stuff, and then stick that in. And if that comes out in the image generation, brilliant. Same with sort of the descriptions of soldiers and clothing and things like that. So I find that side of it really, really useful. And the image generation is very, very clever. I haven't yet used it for sort of advert generation, but I think that's probably something that I'm going to explore, for how you can create sort of more engaging adverts for your books, just using those tools that are out there.
Cool. I know we're gonna have to wind down shortly, because you have to get away, but I just wanted to just wrap up in terms of, um, are you going to stick with the independent publishing, self-publishing route, or at some point do you feel confident enough to approach agents and publishers again once your body of work is beefed up, so to speak?
Uh, yeah, I think I will keep trying with the professional route. I think finding an agent is always hard. They are probably bombarded by manuscripts and people every second of every day. So trying to stand out from that crowd is difficult. And I think self-publishing has been good in many ways, and it allows loads and loads of people to get their stories out there. I am one of those very fortunate people. Um, and I suppose in some ways, the nice thing about self-publishing is it's democratized the publishing process, which is great. And we can all only hope that we all get at some point we get the E.L. James treatment, where your self-published book gets picked up by someone. They realize that actually there's something there, and then they take you forward and they take your body of work. So yeah, I will keep pushing away at that goal.
In terms of your legacy, when you look back, when all is said and done, in however many years' time, at the body of work that you've produced so far and will have produced, what would you like people to think of you the most? What would you like your main takeaway, your legacy to be?
I think the Fenris Saga would be the main legacy, simply because it's the one that I've put the most heart and soul and effort, and sort of my creative body into. Zombie War was, a first attempt. It's rough around the edges. Reading it back, there's definitely some areas I could have done better, written characters differently. But that's the great thing about writing, is it's always a developing process, and you learn every time you do it. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that there's not an age limit on it. There's not an age cap on writing. Um, I think what there is probably there's a creative point where everyone culminates. Just ask George R. R. Martin. But one hopes to be as successful as him as a fantasy writer. That would be fantastic. But yeah, I think my legacy and the bit that I'm proudest of at the moment is the Fenris Saga.
I mean, to that end, you think your future projects would probably be mainly based in the world of the Fenris Saga, whether it be exploring secondary characters, that world in pre-Fenris, post-Fenris, because George R. R. Martin, he's done other stuff, I believe, but most
Mm,
of his publications recently have been playing in Westeros to one degree
yeah.
or another.
Well, I think the nice thing is that so to take George R. R. Martin, he's got a really wide body of work. So there's obviously the Song of Ice and Fire series, but also he is a science fiction writer as well. And some of his proteges have written some incredible stories. The Expanse series are an amazing body of work, and I'd love to have that breadth where I can point to a huge series of fantasy novels set in sort of Fenris's world, that, as you say, explore different cultures, different aspects, different side characters. And I've got some ideas for some short stories that I will probably pull together after book three as a companion storybook. But I'd love to sort of have a body of science fiction work as well. So we will see where the pen takes me.
Um, and if you could go back, knowing what you know now, to the Tom of 2007, what advice and guidance would you give him?
Uh, Write more, write faster, and make sure you carve off some time in your while you've got time, because at that point I didn't have kids. um, so it was I think I probably would have focused more on writing when I had the time to write. But different things take your fancy at different stages of your life. um, Writing is an escape for me, and it's a hobby, and it's enjoyable. But I think I probably would have said, yeah, use the time you've got to, I think, write and invest in that process.
So that's the advice you give to yourself. What advice would you give to aspiring writers out there, maybe members of our audience, who want to start getting into fantasy or sci-fi or even horror?
I think it would be write what you enjoy reading. I think there's too many things out there where people say, "Oh, write this sort of," and there's probably, the internet being the internet nowadays, there's probably far too much advice going around where it's how to get rich quick, how to get published quickly, and people will say, do your research, find out what the latest zeitgeist is, what publishers are going for. But for me, it's a case of I can only write what I enjoy writing. So I think my advice to aspiring authors and writers would be, you've got to read a lot. You've got to read books that excite you and that interest you. And if that is fantasy, science fiction, horror, zombie horror, apocalypse novels, whatever, read what you like. And then if you want to write the stories that interest you, because if if you end up right, there's nothing worse than starting something and you get about halfway through and you just lose all interest in writing it because you've lost the get up and go and the reason for why you're interested in that in the first place. So I think that would be my advice, that you've got to enjoy the subject that you are writing, and that only comes from sort of understanding what it is that you enjoy reading in the first place.
Awesome. So we'll put down links to your website and books on Amazon below in the description. But for those curious out there, where can they find out more about you or even get in touch?
So as I said, everything is on my website at the moment. I did have a Facebook page, but I've recently decided to after initial hack where my Facebook page was compromised. I've now closed Facebook, so I need to rebuild my social media and internet profile. But the website, which, as you say, the link will be in the comments, um, that is the main portal for me at the moment.
Awesome. And when can we look forward to Fenris Saga Book 2 dropping?
That is a very, very good question. So I'm on draft two, version two of the draft at the moment. So if history is anything to go by, probably a couple of years, but I'm really hoping next year. And I will make a promise that I will aim for that.
Awesome. Well, please come back on the podcast to plug book two. We like to look forward to
I
find out more
will.
about it. But in the meantime, good luck with finishing it off. Thank you for your time, Tom. Much appreciated. For those out there who have enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, leave a review, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.